Good morning. We have a very full program this morning, so we want to get started. I want to welcome you on this nippy morning to the local summit. Water has been in the news a lot. Apocalyptic floods, torrential rains. Today we're going to talk about our everyday water, the water in our tap, the water in our sprinkler system, and all the attendant questions, its cost, its quality, its availability, all those things. But before we get into this very exciting program, as is our custom, since we have representatives around here from practically every organization in town, I always ask for announcements. Would anyone like to make an announcement right now? Janet?
That was so well timed. I just got the postmate. Tomorrow night, continuing education, we'll be having a wonderful conversation. You're all invited, free. We're opening this up to everyone. And
Topic?
We'll be talking about actually diversity across the line, from Oscars to everything. So we'll be discussing what's happening in the office place and how diversity makes us stronger. And so please come, 7:30. At the high school and at the library. Join us.
Thank you. Anybody else?
It's been advertised at $20 fee.
Well, we have drop the fee because we'd like more people to attend.
So it's free. This is, wait a minute, this is a free forum. This is a free forum.
Back your money.
A free forum at the high school on diversity. Okay. Peggy? No.
For everybody, this is from Janet, bookbinder from Radar.
Stand up, stand up.
Drug Take Back Day, Saturday, October 28th.
Oh, that's a week from Saturday?
At two locations, Larchmont Village Hall Lobby and Town Hall Mamaroneck Police Department, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay, did everybody get that? That's it. Drug Take Back, the 28th of, that's a Saturday, right? A week from Saturday. Yes. Rose?
Okay, mine is a fun announcement.
Oh, good.
A reminder, this Sunday, Village of Mamaroneck is having its annual spectacular, so by all means, bring your grandchildren, young children, neighbors' children, bring them out and have a good time.
And I think,
On the 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, there's a sign up for the window painting in front of Roberts.
Oh.
And then we have the parade that goes down Mamaroneck Avenue. And you can bring your pets, by the way, in the parade. That goes down to the bottom of Mamaroneck Avenue, and then down the harbor we have the haunted houses. One that's a little scarier with an actual coffin and a person in it, and another one where the lights stay on for the little kids so they don't
Okay.
get scared, and other activities. Well, he kind of sits up, so I don't know.
and I think this Saturday is the parade in Larchmont, correct? Where the, what do they call it? The Ragamuffin. The Ragamuffin parade in Larchmont, right. Anything? Say it again? 12:30. Where? Where do they?
Palmer and Larchmont.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Yes.
Oh, this Friday at LMC-TV, it's a media day, so the studio will be open. There's going to be different workshops, and you can come through and ask questions to me.
Great. What is your name? Tell everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Dina. I work for LMC-TV.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, Marlene? The Shredder is coming to town. When is the Shredder coming?
28th at 10 o'clock in the morning at the town yard.
Where? Oh, okay.
Nancy's behind you.
Okay. Oh, Nancy, you want to say any more about it? Anything else? Yes, George. Welcome, George. George Latimer. Right.
In 3 weeks on election day,
Excuse me.
you have 3 referenda on the back of the ballot, and you need to study up on it in advance. The first one is whether or not there should be a constitutional amendment for the state of New York. The second one creates pension forfeiture for any elected official that is convicted of a job-related felony. And the third referendum creates a land bank forest preserve in New York State. If you, before you go in, obviously there's other things to vote for that day. Read up on those issues so you know what's there.
Thank you, George. Okay. And thank you, everybody. I think we will now proceed to our, is there anything else? I'm sorry, did I see another hand? Okay. I think we will proceed to our program. I don't see Jeff here this morning, so we're going to go ahead with our program, and I'm going to turn that over to Malcolm. Where are you? Oh, sorry.
Good morning. I have no announcements. On behalf of my fellow committee members, Ann McAndrews, Janet DeMasi, and Rose Silvestro, I welcome you to our program on everything you need to know about water. You all know what this is. Depending on where you buy this, it could cost you as little as 25 cents at Costco or maybe a buck or two at the local deli. This is a gallon of our local water, which I got from my tap this morning.
Yay.
One moment. Cheers. I'll send it around. This gallon of water cost me less than a penny from my tap. When I became a trustee about a year and a half ago, I very quickly started getting a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to run a community, including getting an education on what it takes to deliver water to our faucets at home. Fortunately, you're not going to have to run for trustee to learn about water, because our panel of experts are going to tell you everything you need to know. So I'd like to introduce them to you. Nancy Seligson has been the supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck since 2011, after serving on the town board as a councilwoman for over 10 years. She is the vice chair of both the Westchester Municipal Officials Association and the nonprofit association Sustainable Westchester. Nancy was also the chair of the Westchester chapter of the League of Conservation Voters, as well as the Larchmont Mamaroneck Coastal Zone Management Commission. You have any free time? She is currently the New York chair of the city's Citizens Advisory Committee of the Long Island Sound Study, and has been a resident excuse me, of the Larchmont Mamaroneck community since 1988. As town supervisor, Nancy serves as a trustee of the Westchester Joint Waterworks. Steve Robbins is a project manager and associate principal with Woodard & Curran, which offers clients engineering, science, and operations services, including water supply and treatment. Steve leads delivery of water and wastewater infrastructure projects in New York and Connecticut, including the Westchester Joint Waterworks and the Village of Larchmont. Steve's technical expertise includes water system assessments, treatment, storage, and distribution system infrastructure design. He is the president-elect of the Westchester Putnam chapter of the New York State Society of Professional Engineers, and has a BS in mechanical engineering from Cornell University and an MS in environmental engineering from Virginia Tech. David Bertzel has been the business director of the Westchester Joint Waterworks for the past 7 years and is responsible for all business, planning, and financial operations of the water utility. Prior to joining the Waterworks, David spent most of his career in private industry with March McLennan Companies, where he was a managing director of the firm. He has also held the position of budget director for the city of White Plains, and David has both a bachelor's and a master's degree in business administration from Pace University. And Justin Dottino has been the administrator of the Village of Larchmont since 2015. In that role, he has worked on a number of capital projects, including the implementation of new water meters throughout the village, the upgrade of Larchmont's water pumping station, and the rehabilitation and reconstruction of the village's water storage tank. Justin began his public service career with the village of Scarsdale in 2007 as an assistant to the village manager. He also served as Scarsdale's sanitation foreman and as deputy superintendent of public works. A lifelong resident of Elmsford, Justin has a master's in public administration from Rockefeller College at SUNY Albany. And with that, I'll ask Nancy to kick it off.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Malcolm. Some of you might know that I've spent most of my environmental career dealing with water, but a different kind of water, sewer water and Long Island Sound water. But drinking water is important too, and I'm going to give it some due today. We have one of the greatest water systems in the world, and by we, I mean the metropolitan New York area, specifically our area of Westchester County, and New York City. It is the only unfiltered surface water, large-scale water system in the country, and it's cheap, just as Malcolm said. I'm going to give you sort of the basics of the whole system and show you, hopefully, my enthusiasm for the system, and these experts are going to fill in the details and all the gory information. As Malcolm said, as supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck, I sit on the Westchester Joint Waterworks Board, and I sit with the mayor of the village of Mamaroneck and the mayor/supervisor of the village town of Harrison. The Westchester Joint Waterworks is the public water authority that provides water to the town of Mamaroneck, the village of Mamaroneck, and the town of Harrison. And obviously, that's the water we drink, and very importantly, it's the water that we fight fires with. Westchester Joint Waterworks buys its water from the city of New York, where their water comes from the Catskill, Delaware watershed system that's going to be explained behind me, by way of the Westchester reservoirs that you see on 287. And we buy it from two areas, Rye Lake and Shaft 22, two of our favorite places. Westchester Joint Waterworks treats the water, distributes it, and delivers it to the residents of the three communities, as well as selling it wholesale to the village of Larchmont, parts of the city of New Rochelle, and parts of the city of Rye. Last year, Westchester Joint Waterworks delivered 4.72 billion gallons of water. That's a lot of water. And a gallon of water coming from your tap in the town of Mamaroneck, village of Mamaroneck, or Harrison, as Malcolm said, costs less than 1 penny. It's about 0.8%. It's more reliably clean and safe than that water in that nasty plastic bottle. It doesn't have to be packaged in nasty plastic bottles, and it is so way cheaper. It's crazy to buy water. You don't have to buy water. Some of the big issues that are facing Westchester Joint Waterworks include our infrastructure repairs, water filtration requirements, and peak demand management. All fun subjects. We face large and expensive infrastructure repairs, as we do in lots of our areas of infrastructure in our aged communities. The water infrastructure is old and it needs to be fixed. We have frequent water line repairs, including water main breaks, pipe leaks, curb valves, and service connection replacements. These are all the things you get to learn about as a trustee of Westchester Joint Waterworks. We also have the built infrastructure needs that need repair, and those are the water tanks, the pump stations, and the facilities. And you're probably most familiar with the water tank at Wingfoot Country Club. That's the water tank that serves our area. And the pump stations, one of which is at the Larchmont Reservoir in the parking area when you go to the reservoir. Water supply is an issue too, and I know that's hard to understand because we live in an area with abundant rainfall. But something called peak demand is the problem. Westchester Joint Waterworks has to maintain a certain level of pressure in the pipes at all times, no matter what, for all residential customers. And what happens every morning at around, I think, 3, because it starts to 4 or 5, starts to get drawn on, because everyone wakes up at 6, pretty much in general, and runs the water for their shower, to shave, to get ready for the day. And simultaneously, most of the irrigation systems go on at the same time. So although we have plenty of water, that demand puts an enormous strain on the system. So we have to focus on that too. We've got to teach people that you don't have to water your lawn every single day, and you can do it at different times of the day. One of the top issues that is on top of all of these is that in September 1999, the New York State Attorney General obtained an injunction to require Westchester Joint Waterworks to build a filtration plant to its Rye Lake water supply. Not because the water is not safe to drink. I just want you to know that. But it is the most technical, complicated, lawyerly situation that we find ourselves in. So Westchester Joint Waterworks has to deal with satisfying that requirement, and we've been trying to deal with that ever since in the least expensive manner. Westchester Joint Waterworks is considered a public benefit corporation. It's run by the staff of Westchester Joint Waterworks and the management. The 3 trustees that I mentioned that include myself meet twice a month, and we review expenses, operations, personnel, satisfying these requirements, and fixing the infrastructure. So I just wanted to give you the overview that it's a complicated, sophisticated system that's pretty much the most important single element in our health and safety in our world today. So we are really lucky to have such an incredible water supply, such an incredible water delivery system, and really dedicated people who are working on it. But it would help everyone if everyone thought about it a little more mindfully, that it's a precious resource, it needs to be conserved, it needs to be treated respectfully, and it is the cheapest thing we're getting in our lives.
Good morning. I tend to move a lot when I talk, and unfortunately I'm the one with the visual aids, so for those up here, just watch the cord. Thank you, Nancy. Everything that you said is absolutely true and correct. We have a great water supply, and I wanted to take a quick minute to kind of show a little bit about where that is and where it comes from, and some of the technical aspects of how it gets to your tap. I'm actually going to start with this one over here, of course, because I said I was going to be complicated, and I wanted to live up to that. Okay, so the 2 watershed systems from New York City, we're up here in the Catskills. For those in the back, we have the Hudson River, Manhattan, Atlantic Ocean down here, just for perspective. But the water that comes out of your tap starts up here, and we're not so much for Westchester Joint on the Croton watershed system, but we do bring water down from the Catskill Aqueduct through a series of reservoirs, through a series of aqueducts, and for the Westchester Joint Waterworks and Village of Larchmont water supplies, that ends at the Kensico Reservoir. At the Kensico Reservoir, now I get to move over here. And this is a map of all of the public water supplies within Westchester County. So we have the Kensico Reservoir here. We have the Westchester Joint Waterworks and the Village of Larchmont down here at the bottom. There was a progression. So this is a little bit of a zoom in on all of the piping within the Westchester Joint Waterworks system. What's important to know about where the water comes from into the Joint Waterworks system is that, as Nancy said, it comes from 2 locations. We have the Rye Lake source that comes in off of Rye Lake, which is an inlet of the Kensico Reservoir in the north part of the system. And then it comes off of the Delaware Aqueduct at what's called Shaft 22, and then comes through a 30-inch pipeline, and that feeds the lower portion of the system. New York City provides, up off of the Kensico Reservoir, UV disinfection. You may have seen that $2 billion UV treatment facility up in Eastview, and some chlorination up at that facility. That water flows down through the aqueduct different communities take water out at the different shafts. And the joint waterworks feeds into the village of Larchmont from the shaft 22 source. That water has been UV treated, there's been chlorine added, and that water flows through Westchester Joint's 30-inch pipeline over to the Weaver Street pump station, which is off the Sheldrake Reservoir, behind the Sheldrake Reservoir there. At that location, just as with the Rye Lake source, Westchester Joint adds chlorine for disinfection. They add orthophosphate for corrosion control, and they adjust the pH. They also add fluoride at both locations as well, and that's for dental health and cavity prevention. The Joint Waterworks system is rather complicated in how it moves water around in various pressure zones. It's 5 different pressure zones, 7 tanks, 3 pump stations, and they're all kind of working in concert with each other, soon to be 4 pump stations. Working down off of Rye Lake, the water comes in, it's pumped out of the reservoir. Again, it's treated. It is then stored in the purchase tanks. Then there's a pump station from there, which brings it up to the Park Lane area in this area of Harrison. There are 2 storage tanks there to provide some storage and redundancy there. Water then flows from there down through a pressure reducing valve, because we've pumped it up and now we're dropping lower in elevation, into the Woodside tank. And that feeds the downtown area of West Harrison there. Back to the purchase booster station and Purchase Street tanks. We flow by gravity out of those tanks to this purple area, which is called the high service zone. Down at the bottom of the system, when we come in off of that 30-inch pipeline from shaft 22, then the water splits and it does 2 different things there. A portion of it flows by gravity down to this blue zone that's called the low pressure zone, and that's also what feeds the village of Larchmont. So that is all by gravity, all the way from the Catskills, all the way down through the reservoirs, through the pipelines, through the Delaware Aqueduct, and all the way down to where we're sitting here by gravity, which is pretty great. As I said, the flow splits at that Weaver Street station. The portion of it that is not fed by gravity is pumped. And it's pumped into this tan area here, which is called the intermediate zone. That's where there's a winged foot tank. And then also a tank up at Kenilworth as well. So this zone is actually fed from 2 sides. We're pumping up from here, and then we're taking it through the high service zone through another pressure reducing valve into this zone as well. So it's fed both from the north and the south to get that water through the middle part of the system. At each of these major pieces of infrastructure, we have buried valves, piping. There's over 250 miles of piping in the Westchester Joint system, and I don't know the total for Larchmont. I don't know if it's, another 20-ish, 25 miles of pipe. The water tanks are generally constructed of steel, although there's a little bit of variety in that as well. But those, like anything, like your car, it rusts, it needs to be repainted, needs to be recoated, fix out the insides of that. Pump stations generally consist of a building structure, generally brick, concrete buildings, but they have roofs, they have standby generators, they have electrical equipment in them, all of which require periodic updating, modernization, and rehabilitation, just like anything else. The major pipe types in the system, there are ductile iron, cast iron, PVC, probably a little bit of HDPE, high-density polyethylene, and some transite pipe in the systems as well. That's transite is the term of art in that. And making all of this work together is a sophisticated control system. So there's a radio network system that ties all of these locations together. So everything is talking to each other. It knows what the water level is in each tank and which pump is on and what the chlorine residual is and what the turbidity coming in is to the system, and making it all work in concert with each other and adjusting to those periods of lower demand in the middle of the night and then those peak periods of demand in the early morning hours to move the water around and keep it flowing out of the tap. Within the Village of Larchmont system, there are 4 interconnections between Westchester Joint Waterworks and the Village of Larchmont. Again, these are gravity connections for 3 of them. And for the 4th, the village has a storage tank and pumping system. There used to be 2 old steel tanks and an aging pumping system that, with some investment from the Village of Larchmont, has been replaced and renewed. The pumps are new, the control system is new, the electrical system is new, and there's a new concrete tank which will require less maintenance in the long term at that Byron Place station behind the sanitation district. So if you get out there, that's some recent investment that the village has made in their infrastructure as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to David and Justin for some of their specifics.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us to come address you on this important topic. I'd like to say, first of all, to thank Nancy and Steve for their presentations and for covering almost everything I was going to talk about. Actually, there's plenty more to talk about beyond that, but they gave you a very good overview. And I'm going to try and fill in some data, and then later in the question and answer session, I can cover some more specific things you might be interested in. We've talked so far about the system generally, where the water comes from and how it gets to you. A couple of statistics for you that might be interested in. New York City on a daily basis uses approximately 1 billion gallons a day that flows through that New York City system. On its way to New York City, about 10% of that gets dropped off in the upstate communities, which are mostly in Westchester County. And we use, on average, about 14 million gallons a day, which is about 1.5% of that New York City total. So that gives you a sense of scale. Steve had talked about the 250 miles of pipe. That pipe, as Nancy mentioned, is aging and requires more maintenance and replacement. On average, the older pipes in the system are 70 to 80 years old. Now, a lot of the materials they're made of are designed to be fairly long-lived, but we're approaching the end of that life cycle in a lot of cases. So we do have water main breaks. And what we try to do whenever that happens is minimize the inconvenience to our customers. And just to give you a sense for what we're doing, we do have a longer-term capital program, but on a regular basis, as far as maintenance is concerned, we've been working with the member municipalities of the Westchester Joint Waterworks to coordinate with their paving programs, so that we go out and we identify and replace vulnerable water infrastructure in those areas where the municipalities will be paving, so that we don't end up going back and digging up a newly paved street, which everybody loves to see. So we're trying to avoid that as much as possible and coordinate that process. The other thing that we do when we do have water main breaks now, we take a look at the grid of piping and at the valves in the area, and what we do is add valves where they're necessary to reduce the amount of area that's shut down during a given water main break and give us better control of the system. So not only are we replacing infrastructure that's old and failing, we're adding additional enhancements so that the reliability of the system is better, and when something does happen, hopefully you suffer less inconvenience. But I will say, unfortunately, when water mains break, it's never a convenient thing. No one likes to turn on the tap and have nothing come out, or have something discolored come out. But unfortunately, that is a reality of the system. Breaks do occur. and they have to be addressed. And we try to do that in as efficient a way as possible. And we're in the process of upgrading our various communication systems to make communication with our customers quicker and more effective. As far as maintenance of the system is concerned, at this time of year, we do what's called hydrant flushing. We used to do that once a year. We've gone to a twice-a-year program, and basically what that does a couple of things. One, it allows us to verify that fire hydrants are working properly, which is important to everyone, so we can maintain them. It also identifies weak infrastructure in the flushing process. Many times when the hydrants are opened up, if there's a weakness in a pipe in the surrounding area, it may break or leak at that point, and we then can manage that repair a little bit better. The other thing, and a big part of this, is to maintain water quality. It allows us to flush out water in dead ends of the system. As much as possible, we try to have the system looping so there's water constantly moving, but there are places in the system where there are dead ends and sediment accumulates, etc. So we flush that out to maintain the water quality that you enjoy, which is, as Nancy mentioned, among the highest in the world in terms of water quality. Now, when we do the hydrant flushing, sometimes it does result in discoloration, and we assure people that there is nothing harmful in the water mains, so that discoloration is not going to hurt you. It's just residual sediment in the system. People do ask about water filtration systems, which if anybody has a specific question on that, we can answer that later. But I will say about them, we don't generally recommend that people put them into their homes, particularly whole house systems, because in any water system there's going to be a certain amount of sediment, and it will accumulate over time in those systems. And the biggest risk with those filtration systems is that if they get clogged, bacteria can grow within them, and that actually presents a much greater hazard than anything that you could possibly get through the water mains themselves. As far as water quality is concerned, following on that topic, annually we produce a water quality report, which is sent to all of our customers and the retail customers, and it's available to the public in general. It's on our website, and our website, by the way, is www.wjww.com. You can find various information here. There's detailed information in terms of what's tested for and what the results are, and it also gives you a good overview of the system in general. Again, I know a lot of people are concerned about Flint, Michigan, and lead and things of that nature. As Steve mentioned, we do control corrosion in the system, which was a big part of the problem in Flint, that they didn't do that appropriately. So we don't have an issue like that. There is no lead in the water mains system, so that's not an issue. We do have customers with older homes that have lead service lines and connections in some instances, and when we identify those, we, on our side, if there's a piece going in, we replace it, and then we encourage the homeowner to do the same. And as far as the service connections are concerned, we've replaced virtually all of those that may have been made of lead in our system, but we still have customers that have lead service lines. And as part of our lead and copper testing program, we test levels at those what are called Tier 1 sites where generally a lead service line exists going into the property. And usually, an important thing to remember with water quality, in any situation, the best thing for you to do is to flush out the line before you use the water, so that you pull in fresh water from the water main rather than water that may have been sitting in your pipes if you've been away for a couple of weeks or whatever. So we always tell people, run the water for a couple of minutes. As we said, the cost actually is pretty low, but that is an important element of the water quality also. Another thing that I'm sure folks are interested in is cost and how various things impact that. Nancy had mentioned, Malcolm had mentioned as well, that basically a gallon of our water for domestic use works out to about 0.8 of a cent per gallon, which is a pretty good deal. Now we do have what is called an inclining water rate structure. So the more water you use, the higher the rate that's applied to it, and that's a conservation measure. Obviously, as Nancy mentioned, it's a precious resource. We want to control the use of it to some degree. Cost is one way to do that. And it also reflects what happens in the system. Nancy mentioned peak hour demands. That peak hour demand is largely driven by high water use, whether it's irrigation or some other water utilizing system, and that's what drives our capital program. A good part of it is meeting that peak demand for the future, between development that's going on in this area, which we're all aware of, and just water use of the existing residents. There's a price to be paid, if you will, for that, and that is enhancing the infrastructure. So aside from replacing what's old and failing and maintaining what's there, we also have the issue of expanding the capacity of the system, and you can have an impact upon that by managing your water use, and that was an important element that was brought up before. Looking at the scale of various projects that are planned, this map lays that out a little bit and shows we've got projects that are planned to replace sources of water, enhance sources of water, to move water about the system, to increase the capacity in general. An important thing to understand about the water system is Steve described how the water primarily gets to various areas. An important thing to understand is redundancy is a key element here, and we're fortunate with regard to the Westchester Joint Water System that we have two sources of water, and we are able to provide a level of redundancy. A few years back, the 30-inch transmission main running from shaft 22 of the Delaware Aqueduct developed a break, basically we lost water to the southern part of water supply to the southern part of the system, which would be you, effectively. Now, fortunately, we were able to reroute water and move water down from the upper part of the system, from the second source, and also through some emergency interconnections get a little more of an additional supply, but the bulk of it came through the source to the north. And fortunately, it happened in January when the water use is quite a bit lower than it would be at other times of the year.
For a long time, and I don't know if anyone noticed the change. Right. So that system redundancy is really a key element, and a lot of people don't think about that, but that's not something you can do overnight. So it's important to maintain that and enhance that. And a lot of the capital program also goes toward building that redundancy, increasing the size of pipes so that, and putting in pressure regulating valves and other things, pump stations, to be able to move that water around so if something happens, you're not without water for days on end, which doesn't sound like it could happen because we take it for granted every day you turn on the tap and the water comes out, but that's a very real possibility. And just looking down my notes, again, fill in some of the blanks here. With regard to the overall costs of the operations of the Westchester Joint Waterworks, just so you have a sense, our annual revenues are approximately $27 million. Our expenses are about $24 million. About half of that is the cost of water we buy from New York City, from the New York City system. The other half of that cost is our cost of operations, treatment, personnel, etc.
Now, you'll notice the revenues are 27 million, the expenses are 24, and there's 3 million that falls to the bottom line. That $3 million that falls to the bottom line is distributed to our member municipalities to provide funds for their water funds. And basically what that does is provide a buffer to deal.
There's no power. But where does it must be plugged into?
Yeah, I do tend to have a fairly soft tone, so if you can't hear me, please let me know. Can you hear me in the back? What I was saying was $3 million that falls to the bottom line gets distributed to our member municipalities to provide a buffer within their water funds to address emergencies and things that came up. The important thing also to understand is that the water system is self-funded. The general taxpayer does not fund the system. We cover our operating costs, and we provide a distribution to municipalities to cover their debt service costs on the bonds that they issue for water projects. So that's an important thing to understand. So people that use the water, to whatever extent they use it, actually pay for it as opposed to the general taxpayer, which is the way it should be. If you irrigate a lot, you should pay a higher cost associated with that water that we need to do infrastructure.
Pick up the mic now.
Thank you. So it's important to understand that. And Nancy had asked me just to cover something about the billing as well. In the town of Mamaroneck, we've been changing out meters for the last couple of years, the oldest meters in our system, so that we can read all of the meters in the system by vehicle, and eventually we're going to go to what's called an advanced metering infrastructure system, which you have in the town of Larchmont now, which will allow us to collect that data and funnel it to a central computer without sending out a vehicle. But because we've now done that meter change-out program and completed it in the town of Mamaroneck, we've been billing on a monthly basis. Now, that billing on a monthly basis, there are a couple advantages to that. One, most of the bills you get are on a monthly basis, not quarterly, so it's harder for you to forget about it. Hopefully, anyway. And the other important element is that it helps us identify where there may be a problem, a water leak. We'll see it sooner. You'll see it sooner, and it'll help with conservation and controlling the cost of water to you, etc. So that was about all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. So the bad thing about going last is you got to make sure that you don't cover a topic that's already been spoken about. But the good thing about going last is I have time to think of new topics. So I was adjusting my comments so that I could discuss some other items. And what I decided to do is give you a snapshot in basically the day-to-day operations of a water department. Obviously, my knowledge is that of the Larchmont Water Department. But similarly, any public water utility or water department in the area are going to perform the same functions and same services that we do. So a little history. The Larchmont Reservoir sure everyone's familiar with it. Believe it is I'm understanding of it, is that it started off as a ice manufacturing location in which ice was wholesale and trolleyed down to New York City from the reservoir. And as the subdivisions were coming into play and the need for water increased, the Larchmont Water Company was founded. The reservoir was expanded to a second dam, and that water service provided basically it was a private water company to provide water to the growing municipality, and subsequently it was purchased by the Village of Larchmont, who's ran it since. And I believe that purchase of the land was finalized in somewhere around 1922, but the operation might have happened a little bit earlier than that. So a little history there, and that kind of leads to the question of, well, why does Larchmont remain its own water department, its own water company? Well, that's kind of our history. That's our roots. We've been doing it for over 100 years. It's one of the principal functions of village government from its formation, and it's something we think we do pretty well. So we'll continue to do it as long as it makes sense, and certainly as we make those improvements that David and Steve alluded to, we'll be around to do it for a long time, and hopefully at a cost benefit to our residents. So some of the things the Larchmont Water Department does and maintains on a large scale, and something that I don't know if it's been explicitly mentioned, is the ever-increasing laws, enforcement, and regulations that are pushed down upon us from the federal and state governments and even the county. So we're doing more testing, we're performing more reporting, and it's making it safer water for the residents, but also it's more of an effort to meet that task and that obligation. So we perform daily testing with regard to chlorine. We provide testing several times a week with regard to different types of bacteria and other contaminants that may get into the water supply. We do that here in Larchmont as well as other water departments, as well as monitoring the system for pressure and leaks and all sorts of issues, and responding to customer calls and complaints. We go out and we investigate anything from standing water, which may just be a pothole that has some water in it, to what may be an actual water main break to some extent that residents, passerbys, or our own staff notice. So we're constantly in the field. We're constantly looking at the village, its pipes, and to make sure that there's no issues bubbling to the surface, so to speak. Annual water quality report. The village provides that in coordination with a consulting engineer, and that's basically, it's a mandate from the county and possibly the state, I guess, that we provide residents with the information on all of the testing that we perform on an annual basis, history on our water purchasing, our supply, activities that we do in terms of leaks, in terms of lead and copper testing that was previously mentioned. So it gives residents and water customers really a very clear history of the prior year of how your water is, of what quality your water is. And lately we've shifted gears in a cost-saving measure. We used to send that entire report out to residents, but what now we're able to do is we send you a postcard and let you know when it's available, and we post it online. So it's a PDF, it's easy to read, and again, it saves the village quite a bit of money by doing it this way, as opposed to sending out an entire booklet that some people may choose or not choose to read. We also maintain an emergency response plan. So the county and the state and the federal government wanted to make sure that in the event of a serious issue in terms of managing our water supply to you, that we have alternate means of obtaining that, or if things come up that may threaten our water supply, that we have safeguards in place to protect this valuable commodity. And we provide that. We provide updates to that plan as required. And again, it's something else that the village takes on, the water department takes on, as do our comparable departments. The hydro testing was alluded to, and that's a good segue, is the village will be starting its hydro testing next week. And in addition to the activity that was previously mentioned, the village is taking an extra step, and we're actually including our fire department. And in talking with my peers both on the fire side and the water side, as you may think, it's very intuitive that the fire department participates in hydro testings. Generally, they don't. And if you look at all the water districts around, if you look at the various municipalities that I'm very close with, fire departments are rarely included or participate in this effort. This year, Larchmont will be having its firefighters tag along, so to speak, to participate in operating the hydrants and recording the data. And some of that data includes flow data, how much water is passing through that hydrant at any given time, and pressure, both static pressure and residual pressure, so that the fire department will know in the event of a fire what's going to happen to the system as they open up different hydrants. So, we know that if we open this hydrant, it's going to respond this way, but in a large-scale fire, we're going to open multiple hydrants, and it's good for the fire department to know the impact of these efforts, and they may strategically open different hydrants with this information. So we're going to be able to pull that information together and compile it, and again, we're going to use that in a different aspect. We're going to use that for our ISO rating and hope to get a better a fire insurance rating for our residents, particularly our commercial property owners. We also do leak detection. That's a big part of our operation. The Village of Larchmont has been successful in detecting and repairing leaks. Our wholesale purchasing from Westchester Joint is down 14% from the prior year, thereabouts, 10 to 14%, depending on when you start the number. Now, if you think about a change in behavior, no one's changed their behavior 14%. So that's really a result of us finding some leaks that were difficult to track down, and we've been putting an extra effort in there, and that's going to be at the benefit of all of our water customers, because we'll be able to keep rates low. We're not paying for water we're not using, so we're only going to pay for water that we're actually able to then transfer the cost down to the end user. And that's an ongoing effort, and given that our pipes, some pipes are over 100 years old and even pushing 120 years old, this is an effort that'll never end, because we're probably not going to be able to get to a point where we say all our pipes are less than 20 years old or 25 years old and they'll be good for a while. We're going to have 100-year-old pipes for many years to come, and it's not a bad thing if we maintain them and we keep track of the leaks and make sure that we work the valves and we make sure that the water quality stays high. So that's something we're committed to doing, and we're going to continue to do that. Meter replacement. Meters are important. If we don't have proper meters, we're giving water away for free, and that's not fair to the person who has an accurate meter. So the village, as well as the Westchester Water Works, have replaced their meters. The village went to the fixed-base network that Westchester Joint is moving to, and what that does is it helps the village and it also helps the customer. We have real-time data on consumption. We run leak detection reports. So basically our system has the ability to capture reads every 15 minutes from each meter. And that meter is then pulled into the server at the end of a 24-hour period. And as that data is reviewed, if the system detects reads on each of those 15-minute intervals, in our mind, that's a leak, because most residential properties don't require flow through them for 24 hours a day. And what we do in response to that, since right now we're only performing billing on a semi-annual basis, we will be moving to a quarterly basis in February, is we send leak detection letters out to residents a quarter of the way through that cycle, so that, again, someone who may have a leak on their end is not stuck waiting 6 months to find out their toilet was leaking and it cost them $350. So again, it's another level of service that the village is providing to its residents, and I'm sure as the technology avails itself, Westchester Joint and other water providers will be able to do the same service. In terms of consumption, not only a leak will drive up your consumption, but poor settings on your water uses within your property will again affect consumption, namely sprinklers. That's the largest water usage on your property, generally speaking. It's the biggest burden for the water demand, as we talked about peak demand. We don't have peak demand problems in the winter. The peak demand is the summer when the sprinklers kick on. And what we found, people, you're just really unaware of the settings on their zones, and that a 5-minute change or a 10-minute change per zone could save you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending on how many zones you have. And watering that much really wasn't necessary. There's a certain amount of water that your horticulturalist or your landscapers will tell you you need, and more than that may be detrimental to your roots and your root systems and your plants. So number one is check your system, battery backup where possible, rain sensors where possible, and as our own mayor found out, a power interruption in power supply could reset your settings, even if you take the time to set them properly. So again, be mindful of your settings, check them frequently, and it's worth to have someone check it more than once a season, because we did find many residents who were complaining about high water bills. It was a direct correlation to their sprinkler settings. Just a couple of other bits of information. The village water department consists of 3 full-time staff. Everyone else, as part of the water department, is supplemented by the village itself. And what that does is it's a synergy between the village's needs of having other forms of management, personnel, apparatus, and equipment, and the needs of making sure that we just keep the costs as honed in as possible to the water system. So the village's DPW, for example, provides assistance to the water department in performing many of its construction projects. DPW has backhoes, it has dump trucks, it has laborers, it has saws and jackhammers, and what we do is we share that with the water department, and so that there's not a need to duplicate these resources. Again, in terms of course sharing and consolidation of resources, well, the village has been doing that for 100 years with its DPW and its water department. Again, the end goal is to keep the cost down for the general fund taxpayer as well as the general fund ratepayer to the water department. In addition, as you know, the water fund itself is self-supported through its water rates. So again, anything that the water department does is done through that billing. And as I mentioned, the billing in Larchmont right now is happening semi-annually. We will be moving to a quarterly billing again. That should help residents and the village with cash flow and monitoring their consumption and leaks and other issues and trending and forecasting and so forth. I don't know if I have anything else to mention aside from the fact that the village's capital projects are nearing completion, as was alluded. The village has invested close to $3.5 million just on water projects, and again, that debt service that we speak of, the principal and interest payments, will be coming through the water fund. But the village, through its financial standing, is able to take that debt out and receive the AAA bond rating that the village has, and that benefit is passed on to the water department, so to speak, through our great interest rate. And then the water fund makes the general fund whole through a transfer to make those debt payments each year. And that's been successful so far. And I believe that's all I have.
Time for questions. I'd like to ask the first question. When I plunged into this subject,
That's water out.
I kept hearing about the importance of backflow valves. Can someone explain what they are and why it's important?
Sure, I'll turn that over to David or Steve.
Yeah, the question that was asked was, what is the importance of backflow devices? Basically, the issue with backflow is you don't want contaminants obviously coming back into the water system and then coming back into the water and then being distributed to you in the water you drink. So if you have a system, take for instance a commercial property that has some kind of industrial process or a medical facility, that has various types of chemicals, waste, etc., that has a system that's being fed with water. In the event that a water main were to break, if there was a major fire, there was a drop of water pressure in the general water system, those contaminants that exist in those systems could then be pulled back into the water mains, and then they would be distributed to the properties around them. And that presents the highest hazard, probably medical facilities, industrial processes, etc. Then you have, at a residential level, you have in-ground irrigation systems, which in some cases have an automatic chemical feed, and in general are exposed to various contaminants that exist in the soil, etc. So if again a water main failure occurs, or a major use of water, such as in the case of a major fire, the pressure goes down, and due to that pressure falling in the water main, the water gets drawn back into the water system and can contaminate your neighbor's water and your own water. So the backflow prevention device has valves within it that, when that type of pressure event happens, if there's a lowering of the pressure or a complete failure of pressure in the water main, they close and they prevent the contaminants from flowing back. And that's basically what it is.
My house is half in the town of Mamaroneck and half in New Rochelle. And unfortunately, well, we used to have United Water. United Water was taken over by Suez. And Suez is a company that's known for taking over the public water, turning it private, and really jacking up the prices. And our water has gone up maybe 7 or 8 times the price. So I'm wondering how a private company that came in and took over public water.
Well, actually United Water, the name that you mentioned, actually that always was owned by Suez. They did a branding change, if you will, and they introduced the name of the parent company, which is a foreign company that I believe is French based. But United Water was their U.S. operating company. Yeah, basically municipalities will negotiate in some cases management of the water system with a private company, which is what happened in that instance, and the economics can certainly be different. The orientation can certainly be different for the private company, and that's not uncommon to see the water rates rise significantly because of the returns they need to get for their shareholders, etc.
My question is about
Yeah.
UV treatment. So, as you're probably all aware, the county paid a record $1.1 million fine about 2 years ago because they were not compliant with EPA's enhanced treatment rule for about 3 years. And with Bob asking those cuts to the county services, their disclosure now says that we're not going to get that Eastview connection to provide UV treated water for Westchester Joint Water Works. So, given that we're now out of compliance for about 5 years running, should we expect to have to pay $1 million fine or more, as well on top of the cost of building the UV treatment at the violation?
Do you want me to do it? Okay. Well, yeah, there are a few issues with that. Nancy had mentioned the filtration plant issue earlier on, and there are fines associated with that. And we're in the process of working out a schedule with New York State on a capital, as part of our capital program, to promote projects that will directly address that particular issue. We have been in our capital program doing a number of projects directed toward moving more ultraviolet treated water from our Shaft 22 source to the northern part of the system. So in the off-peak months, say from November to March, we're able to push 90%, and in some cases, depending on the day, almost 100% of UV treated water to the northern part of the system, which gives us 100% compliance and coverage. Now, we have limitations we need with regard to the peak demand season. We don't have sufficient carrying capacity in the system or pumping capacity, so there are other projects aimed at alleviating that situation and allowing us to move more UV water north at higher demand seasons. But at the end of the day, because of the level of demand in the system overall, the option that's being looked at, or and their plans have been developed on, would be to replace the Rye Lake source with another source along the Delaware Aqueduct. And if you look at our longer range capital plan, we've got probably $165 million in projects, capital projects related to that, to doing that over the next 10 years or so. So yes, it is a significant issue, and we're working with the state authorities and also with other regional authorities to develop regional solutions to address those things.
Would it have been more cost effective for the county to provide the Eastview connection?
Yes.
Thanks.
Sure. 50 years ago, New York City started to build something called Water Tunnel Number 3. It's going to come online this year or maybe next year. There was a report in the paper that would allow the city to shut down Water Tunnel Number 1 for cleaning, and it will then result in a reduction by 50% of the water that New York City supplies to its customers. I assume that your organization is one of those customers, and I, as a Village of Larchmont resident, are a customer of yours. How are we going to deal with a 50% reduction in water use if that report is correct?
Yeah. Oh, okay. The question was relating to an additional water tunnel that the New York City has been working on, and also related to maintenance that they're planning to do on the system in the future that would result in a significant reduction in the amount of water available through the aqueduct. There is a significant leak on the system, I think, up in the Newburgh area. Which is where a heavy part of that maintenance is going to be directed. That repair has been pushed off a couple of different times, and I think their target date is now somewhere around 2021, 2022, if I'm not mistaken. What the latest plan with regard to that was that they would do this maintenance in off-season months, so that 50% reduction in available water that you hear about is, depending on what time of the year you're looking at, maybe more or less. In this case, again, they're looking at doing this during the off-season months. The water demand's lower to begin with. We are working and have been working with New York City on a demand management plan. We've been working on that with them for probably the past year and a half. We're due to have a meeting with them over the next couple of months to hammer that out, and there are some reductions in water use that they're asking for, which are not of the scale that you mentioned. They're lower than that, but there are programs that we're instituting and changes that we're instituting in the metering system, et cetera, to address that. So.
Village of Larchmont, you're a customer of New York City Water Supply. Village of Larchmont is a customer of yours. You mentioned that you're operating a $3 million profit. I assume that profit is generated because you mark up the water that you receive and sell to the Village of Larchmont. How much more expensive is it for a Village of Larchmont resident to have water than one of your customers?
Okay, the question was that we're Westchester Joint Waterworks is a customer of New York City, and Larchmont is a customer of the Westchester Joint Waterworks, and what's involved with the cost and markup of that water that we sell to Larchmont. Larchmont is a wholesale customer for us, as is Suez, which is the provider of water in Rye and Portchester. And we wholesale water to both organizations, or both entities. In the case of the water or the cost that you pay to us, it's obviously significantly less than our member municipalities, because we do other things that the local Village of Larchmont Water Department does for you, like billing and repairs and metering and all of that. So you're paying a wholesale cost from us as opposed to a retail cost which our members are paying. Basically, we've included in the cost to Larchmont the cost of the water from New York City, as well as the treatment costs and distribution costs associated with that supply of water. And then there will be projects that will also be part of that. And at this point, again, we have joint system projects that are coming down the road, and those will certainly factor into that cost.
We didn't answer my question. My question is, how much more do I pay? You made a display of a gallon of water. How much more do I pay for that gallon of water village than someone who lives in the city?
Well,
Maybe not. It may not be a fair question to you.
It's about 2 cents a gallon.
So they're discussing the price now, but profit isn't what, probably not the right word.
You're billing $6.79. Yeah, we bill $5.79. Yeah. Yeah. our rate inclines. Yeah. So
it's almost the same, depending on what you use.
okay. Yeah. So based on what Justin and I were just talking about, we're probably in about the same range.
Just to jump in, because I'm more familiar with the Larchmont's billing cycle. So the billing is not apples to apples because Westchester Joint has a escalating rate, so they may pay a cheaper rate initially. I think it's $5.79 for the first however many units, and then it escalates from there. Larchmont's winter rate in the off-peak is about $5.79, I believe. It's about $5.60 a unit. A unit is 100 cubic feet, which is 748 gallons. That rate increases in the summer to $6.79 per unit, but does not escalate further. So depending on the water, how much water you use, if you use a little bit of water, then you may pay a little bit more in Larchmont than you do in Westchester Joint. However, if you're on what an average user does, then in the aggregate, you're probably paying a little bit less in Larchmont than you would in Westchester Joint. Again, it's driven by use, and it's driven on the fact that Westchester Joint has an escalating rate. The Village doesn't. We have a bifurcated rate for the low peak demand season and the peak demand season. And the Village will be revisiting our rate structure again to capture the tiered aspect, and the drive for that is if you're using a lot of water, you have to pay more because the Village, we pay more collectively as a penalty from New York City when we go over our excess use. We pay 3.5 times the base rate of water when in the whole our community uses more than what New York City sets out is the standard, which I believe is 150 gallons per capita per day or something along those lines. That rate's based on apartment dwellers, not folks who irrigate their property. So again, it's complicated, but given that, we still manage to keep the rate pretty low.
Yeah, the other thing with regard to what Justin just mentioned, that excess water rate that you would pay to New York City is a direct pass-through of a calculation that New York City does. So we're not involved with that. The other thing that the Village of Larchmont has done, which Justin mentioned before, was they've done a fair amount of leak detection, and that has had an enormous impact on the amount of water that's being purchased wholesale, which Justin mentioned before. So that excess water cost, that higher rate that's paid to New York City, that amount will actually come down significantly over time.
You're back. Okay. First of all, I just want to thank the board for bringing up this topic. This is a topic that makes us better citizens, more informed. It's a civics lesson, a science lesson. It's everything. And as we once heard an Asian philosopher once say, water is the humblest element, it seeks the lowest level. Now for my question. So, very quick questions. When I took a bike ride up near Kensico this summer, and there was a lone guard there in front of those pumping stations, I believe. And I want to ask about security, just generally. Have there been any incidents? That's the first one. The second one is when our forebears founded this water system, did they foresee it being perennial? What's in that original plan that still exists, and are things going to start aging, stones, the conduits, so security and the larger picture. Who would like to take that?
I could just start, but David's going to have to fill in the exact things.
One of the items in our budget in the Westchester Joint Waterworks that we have reviewed in the past few years is security. And all that conjures up. So we have put in cameras at all of the facilities and all of the pump stations and all of the sites that are reporting back to Westchester Joint Waterworks for security. But as I opened up with, this is an unfiltered surface water large-scale system. So it is vulnerable in that sense, but it has incredible advantages for us.
Yeah, in New York City, as part of protecting its water system with regard to the upstate reservoirs, has invested billions of dollars in land acquisition and security enhancements to protect that. And that's true of their facilities like the Kensico Reservoir down here as well. One of our sources being the Rye Lake, which is the eastern end of Kensico Reservoir, our facilities are located on New York City DEP property. So there is a New York City DEP police force that patrols that as well. So in addition to the security that we have, both related to our systems and our facilities, we also have what New York City is investing in that as well.
Two quick questions. One, I live in Rye, and I'm wondering, in terms of shared services, has there ever been any thought, looking at that map, you see Rye is directly adjacent to a large section.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any thought about sharing services when it comes to managing the water of Rye and the large market?
Well, there is, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's a question about has there been any conversation about sharing services with Rye because it's an adjacent community. There are two things with regard to Rye. There's the Greenhaven section of Rye is actually served by the Westchester Joint Waterworks on a retail basis, and there are about 350 properties there. So they are actually directly served by us because of where they're located. The rest of Rye, the water is coming from the Westchester Joint Waterworks on a wholesale basis to Rye residents, otherwise through Suez, which is managing that system, as well as Portchester.
And then the other question is, in terms of climate change, I know Nancy mentioned the idea of all the flooding and things that are going on. Has there been any specific look into what are the implications of those, these, some more of a drought, some more of a flood? I mean, have you looked into that or tried to figure out how that would fit into your long-range plans?
Okay, the question was about climate change and has that been looked at in terms of planning for the water system. Certainly, New York City DEP has done a lot of long-range planning, and there have been a lot of things over time that have impacted that, and just to look at something historical with regard to New York City is kind of an interesting thing, and this is outside of climate change, but let me start with this. When they looked at New York City on projecting their water use 30, 40 years ago, they thought it was going to dramatically increase from the level that it was and double, essentially, which would have put them somewhere at 2 billion a day, as opposed to where they are at 1 billion. The big things that factored into that were redevelopment of a lot of areas of New York City that had been allowed to run down, had a lot of broken pipes and were unmetered, etc. And then actually metering, which they didn't do in New York City for a long time. So that long-range plan, had they not reassessed that as they went, would have been dramatically off, and they would have ended up investing a lot more than they needed to. What we've tried to do in looking at our planning is look at really what the impacts have been to this area in general to this point. Climate change, I think, is certainly a very difficult thing for us to predict in terms of, obviously for anyone to predict. But we do know there have been droughts in years past. We haven't had one of those in quite some time. To looking at our system, we've tried to promote odd-even irrigation. We've tried to promote with our customers the importance of conserving water over time and managing water use, and I think you'll see more emphasis on that in coming years to try and keep things at the appropriate level. We're planning for redundancy in our system and for additional sources of water so that we can improve the capacity and the ability to deliver that water. So over time, hopefully, we've taken into consideration enough factors to offset issues that we see, and including in the treatment and water quality issues that we've looked at over time. But that is it's an interesting question, and it's a difficult one to address, I think. But what we're trying to do is get the best information we can and look at the various options that are potentially available out there.
Time for one more question.
Sort of a tag on, or the talking about security here in Pensacola. It is said, or the coalition that is citizens who is fighting the privatization of the airport says that the runoff from the runways goes right into Pensacola. of years. Should we be alarmed that that is going to come off of airplanes and going back into our drinking water?
You just alarmed me.
So I'm not going to touch the political side of that with any degree, but from an engineering controls standpoint, I'm sorry, the question was runoff from the airport impacting Kensico Reservoir. There is a direct drainage from the airport down to the reservoir. Part of the nice flight path that comes in there is because it's nice and flat and no trees right over the reservoir there. There are a variety of engineering controls that are in place to manage runoff from the airport. Their de-icing systems are captured and treated. In terms of bulk runoff and adding turbidity and sediment and things like that from the airport land, there are a series of silt curtains that are in place in the reservoir. If you drive down 684, if you're coming south and you look to your right towards the reservoir, you'll see the booms in the reservoir itself that help settle out some of those solids and some of those contaminants before they hit the intake to the joint waterworks system. So in general, pollution to surface water bodies is a concern. It is something that people should continue to be aware of and hold our leadership accountable for, but I don't think that there's an imminent hazard there that isn't already being addressed or controlled.
Can you comment on the pending finding of the county for exceeding their discharge limits of gas fluid to the reservoir?
I can't comment on that. I don't know if anyone here wants to address that. No.
You left us with a tough one. We're running a little late.
Sure.
I don't think I'm ever going to turn on the faucet the same way. On behalf of all of us in this local summit, thank you so much.